He said I'd never make it a week without him. I smiled, the kind of smile that only hides a storm.
The day I left, the roses in our marble garden wilted faster than I did. There was a kind of silence in our house that made even the clock sound afraid to speak. Every tick echoed through polished hallways, over marble floors, through rooms so large they could hold 100 people, if only there were any to fill them. That was Victor's world. Vast, immaculate, and hollow. From the outside, our marriage looked perfect. We were the golden couple people whispered about at charity events. The magazine covers called us refined, graceful, built to last. Yet no one noticed how my smile never reached my eyes, how his hand on my back felt like ownership instead of affection. He liked to say I made him look softer. I was the human in his carefully curated image of success. But in private, he didn't want softness. He wanted silence. He'd tell me, "You're lucky, Elara. Some women spend their lives wishing for a fraction of what you have." I'd nod. Like an obedient painting hanging in his private gallery, I was supposed to be beautiful, still, untouchable. I remember the sound of his shoes most of all. Those sharp, deliberate steps echoing across the marble each morning before he left for work. They always reminded me of a gavel striking wood. I used to paint before him, before the suits and the parties, before the chauffeur opened car doors like I was glass about to crack. I used to sit on the floor of a tiny studio apartment, barefoot and free, and paint the city dawn bleeding into windows. He loved that about me once. My art, my chaos, until he didn't. He said painting was a hobby for people without purpose. He said I didn't need to work anymore. He said the world should only ever see me in gowns, not with paint under my fingernails. So I stopped. The brushes went into drawers. The easel was taken to storage, and a quiet part of me, something wild and wordless, began to wilt. The housekeeper, Miriam, noticed first. She was older, gentle in the way people are when they've seen too much, and learned to move through the world like prayer. She'd been in Victor's family long before I arrived, yet somehow, she always treated me like someone who could still be saved. Every morning, she left small acts of mercy around the house. A cup of chamomile tea left steaming on my vanity, a folded blanket in the garden seat I favored, a single white rose in a glass, placed beside the window where I used to paint. Sometimes, when Victor was away, she'd knock on my door softly. "I made soup," she'd whisper. "Come down before it cools." And we'd sit in the kitchen, her small warm hands wrapped around her teacup, my shoulders heavy with words I never spoke. She never asked questions. But once she said, "Child, I've seen cages made of gold before. They shine, but they still keep you from flying." Her words stayed with me. That night, Victor came home late. The rain was coming down hard, one of those violent, endless rains that made the chandeliers tremble slightly. I sat by the window watching droplets chase each other down the glass. My reflection looked ghostly beside the city lights. He walked in, smelling of whiskey and power. His tie was loosened, his eyes sharp with self-importance. "I spoke with Edward about your charity proposal," he said without looking at me. "He thinks it's sentimental nonsense. And frankly, I agree. You don't need to be involved in whatever this is. Focus on something that matters." "What matters?" I asked quietly. He turned to me, puzzled. "Our image. This home. You, us. That word had become a weapon. I didn't argue. I rarely did anymore. Instead, I looked past him at the window. For a moment, I thought the rain looked like brushstrokes on glass. Maybe the world was still trying to paint me. Then he said it. The sentence that broke whatever illusion I had left. "Without me, you'd have nothing, Elara. You couldn't even live a week on your own." He said it so casually, like a fact carved in marble, like he'd been waiting years to finally voice it. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just watched his reflection in the window, the rain distorting his shape. For the first time, he seemed smaller. Not in stature, but in meaning. It was then I realized something quietly miraculous. I didn't hate him. I just didn't need him. I couldn't sleep that night. The house hummed faintly, the rain still whispering against glass. I walked barefoot through the hallways, my footsteps echoing like soft defiance. In the attic, where no one went anymore, I found a chest covered in dust. It was tucked behind old trunks filled with gowns and forgotten furniture. Inside lay the pieces of a woman I'd almost forgotten, my sketchbook. Its cover was worn, the pages brittle around the edges, but when I opened it, color still lived there, sunset pinks, ocean blues, the messy fingerprints of a girl who once believed she could paint her way into the world. Each page felt like an inhale after years of drowning. There was a self-portrait, unfinished. My younger eyes stared up at me, uncertain but alive. I touched the paper, tracing that girl's cheek with my thumb, and whispered, "I remember you." For a long time, I sat there in the dim light, the rain softening to drizzle outside, my heart filling with both grief and something wilder. Hope. Maybe. By morning, the decision was already made. I woke before dawn. The sky was the color of ash. Miriam was in the kitchen, already brewing coffee. She looked up, startled when she saw me dressed in plain clothes. Jeans, a sweater, my hair tied back. A small bag by my side, Elara. "I have to go," I said quietly. "Before he wakes." She didn't ask where. She just stepped forward and wrapped me in her arms, her embrace trembling. "Then go," she whispered. "And don't look back, child." When I pulled away, she pressed something into my hand, a small silver locket she always wore. "For luck," she said, "and for remembering who you are." I slipped my sketchbook into my bag, wrapped carefully in a piece of linen. The last thing I took from that house wasn't jewelry or clothes. It was the only proof I had of the woman I used to be. As I walked through the grand foyer, the marble floor felt colder than ever. The chandeliers still glittered above me, but their light seemed hollow. Outside, the morning mist swallowed the driveway. The roses in the garden drooped under last night's rain. I reached out to touch one, its petals soft but already fading. I thought of all the years I'd tried to bloom in his shadow, and how my colors had slowly drained. Then I stepped beyond the gate. The air outside the estate tasted different. Real, imperfect, alive. The city still slept. Only the faint hum of early trains filled the distance. For a moment, I stood at the edge of the driveway, the mansion behind me fading in the fog. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. Freedom didn't roar, it whispered. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet. I walked down the empty street, the mist curling around my ankles like an old friend. Each step felt like erasing a lifetime of silence. The world was small again, human-sized. And though I didn't know where I was going, I knew what I was leaving behind. Not just a man, but the version of myself who believed I needed his permission to exist. I reached the edge of the city just as the sun began to break through the fog. Light spilled across the wet pavement, painting gold over gray. I looked down at my reflection in a puddle, barefaced, hair undone, eyes tired but alive. It had been years since I'd seen that face. I thought of Victor's words. "You couldn't even live a week on your own." I smiled softly to myself. We'd see about that. As I boarded the early bus heading toward the coast, I pressed my hand against my bag where the sketchbook rested. It felt like a heartbeat beneath the fabric. In the window's reflection, I watched the city fade behind me, towers dissolving into fog, the mansion somewhere far within them, still sleeping. The bus engine rumbled, steady and low, like the beginning of a new rhythm. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of silence. I was becoming it, learning how to fill it with my own breath, my own colors, my own story, and as the dawn finally broke in full, spilling light across the road ahead, I whispered into the glass, "Let it begin." The bus left me at the edge of a coastal town I'd never heard of. The sign was faded, the letters eaten by salt and time. The air smelled of seaweed and smoke, and in the distance, waves crashed like slow applause against the rocks. It was smaller than any place I'd ever lived. Narrow streets, crooked chimneys, laundry lines fluttering like prayer flags. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of smallness. I was grateful for it. The quiet here felt different, not suffocating, but open. I wandered until I found a bakery tucked between two leaning brick buildings. Its window was fogged, the glass painted with the words Ruth's Bread and Mercy in curling white letters. I don't know what drew me inside. Maybe the word mercy. The bell above the door tinkled softly as I entered. The air was thick with warmth and sugar, the scent of rising dough and burnt crusts. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, her hair tied in a loose braid streaked with silver. She was wiping flour from her hands when she looked up. "Well, you look like the wind brought you in," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "I suppose it did," I answered, trying to sound light, though exhaustion clung to me like damp clothes. "You hungry?" I hesitated, pried a stubborn ghost in my chest. "Just looking for a room to rent, actually." She studied me for a long second, then pointed toward the ceiling. "There's a small attic upstairs. Been empty since my niece married off. It's not much, but it's warm, and the sea doesn't reach that high. Rent's cheap if you don't mind helping with dough." "Dough?" "Kneading, baking, lifting sacks. The sort of work that keeps you human." Her eyes twinkled. That was how I met Ruth. The attic was tiny, barely large enough for a bed, a small desk, and a window that opened to the sea. The wallpaper peeled like sunburned skin, and the floor creaked with every movement. Yet when I opened the window and felt the salt air brush my face, it felt like a cathedral. I slept that night wrapped in a borrowed blanket that smelled of yeast and lavender. Outside, the tide rose and fell like a lullaby. When I woke, light poured through the window like soft gold. I sold a bracelet that morning, a thin silver chain I no longer needed, and used the money to buy tea, a few pencils, and a small piece of charcoal. That night, I painted again, not on canvas, I didn't have one, but on scraps of cardboard from the bakery's flower boxes. I dipped my brush in leftover tea for color, darkened edges with the charcoal, and let my hands remember what they once knew. The strokes were clumsy, uncertain, but they moved. They breathed. I painted the sea, the curve of a loaf of bread, the wrinkles in Ruth's smile. When I was done, I sat back, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Days began to take shape, slow and steady, like dough rising under a cloth. At dawn, I'd help Ruth in the bakery. The rhythm of kneading became its own kind of prayer. Press, fold, turn, repeat. The scent of baking bread filled every corner, clinging to my hair and skin. "Don't think too hard while you knead," Ruth would say. The dough listens. We'd talk little. Mostly we worked side by side, the sound of the waves outside keeping time. In the evenings, when the bakery emptied and the air turned cool, I'd climb the narrow stairs and paint by the window until my hands ached. It was Ruth who first asked about my past. "Someone break your heart?" she said one evening, her voice casual, though her eyes were kind. "Yes," I admitted softly. "But I think I broke it too, by staying too long." She nodded, dusting flour from her apron. Love and pride are the same sometimes. Both need letting go before they ruin the batch. I smiled faintly. "Did you always run this place alone?" "Not always. My husband built it. Then the sea took him." Her words fell softly, like crumbs on the table. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. Some stories don't need retelling. They just need understanding. From then on, we spoke less and shared more silences. It was enough. One morning, Ruth found me repainting the bakery's weather-beaten sign. The old paint had flaked away, and the wood looked tired. I didn't ask for permission. I just picked up a brush and started. By the time she returned from the market, the sign glowed again, deep blue letters edged in gold. I'd added small painted loaves along the border, their crusts catching sunlight. She stopped on the street and looked up. "Well," she said after a long pause, "if I'd known you had that in your hands, I'd have made you repaint the whole shop." I laughed, a sound that surprised both of us. The next morning, people passing by began to notice the sign. A few asked if I'd do their shop fronts too. I didn't say yes at first. I wasn't sure I was ready to be seen again, but eventually I agreed. That's how Jonas found me. He ran the small framing shop 2 doors down. Young, quiet, with the kind of eyes that studied light instead of people. One afternoon, he stopped at the bakery window while I was painting a small sign for Ruth's shelves. "You did the front sign?" he asked. "Yes." He nodded, still looking at my brushstrokes. "You paint like someone who's trying to remember sunlight." I froze. It was such an odd thing to say, but it hit something deep. He smiled faintly. "If you ever have more work, I could frame it for you. Display a piece or 2 in my window if you'd like. Tourists buy art when they can smell bread nearby." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That night, I painted 3 small pieces, seascapes, quiet and simple, and brought them to his shop the next day. He hung them in the window without ceremony, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Within a week, 2 had sold. I used the money to buy real paints. My hands shook as I opened the tubes, the smell of oil and pigment like memory reborn. Then the letter came. It was slid under the bakery door one morning, a crisp envelope with Victor's company crest stamped in gold. My hands went cold before I even opened it. Inside, a short note. "Victor requests you return his belongings. The car, the jewelry, the paintings. He wishes to close all remaining ties. L. Harrow." Assistant read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it beside the dough I'd been kneading. Ruth looked up from the counter, reading my face. "Bad news?" "Just the past trying to tidy itself," I said softly. That evening, I gathered everything I'd taken from that house, the jewelry, the designer scarves, even the silver locket Miriam had given me, though that part hurt. I couldn't bear the weight of anything that reminded me of ownership, all except the sketchbook. That was mine. It had always been mine. I packed the rest in a box and mailed it to the address listed. The next morning, the post office clerk stamped it without a word. When I stepped outside, the sea wind whipped my hair across my face, and for some reason I laughed. It felt like shedding skin. That night, a storm rolled in from the ocean. The wind rattled the attic windows, and rain began to leak through the roof in thin streams. I set a candle on the desk, its flame trembling, and opened my sketchbook. Water dripped onto the pages as I painted, a blur of colors, chaos and light, sea and fire. My tears mixed with the rain, my brush moving faster, freer. It wasn't pain anymore. It was release. When the candle burned low, I leaned back, breathless. The room smelled of wax and salt, my hands streaked with color. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, but I felt only calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel broken. I just felt becoming. In the morning, Ruth climbed the stairs with tea and found me asleep at my desk, surrounded by finished paintings. She looked at the colors, the lines, the rawness of it all. "You worked through the storm?" she asked softly. I couldn't stop. She placed the cup beside me and studied the nearest canvas, a sea of blues and golds, wild and unfinished. "It's beautiful," she said. "And alive, like it finally remembers who it is." I smiled weakly. "I don't know what it's supposed to be," she chuckled. "You, dear. It's supposed to be you." We sat there for a while, watching the light pour through the cracks in the roof, painting stripes across the floorboards. Then Ruth spoke again, her voice low and steady. "You're not broken, Elara. You're just learning your true shape." Her words landed softly, but they filled every quiet place inside me. The days after that blurred into something peaceful. I painted between baking shifts, each page of the sketchbook fuller than the last. My hands grew calloused, my shoulders stronger. People began to ask for my work by name, the lady above the bakery. I never corrected them. I didn't need titles anymore. At night, I'd walk down to the beach and let the wind lift my hair, the salt sticking to my skin like stardust. The town had started to know me. But more importantly, I was beginning to know myself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Ruth called out from the doorway, "Elara, you're burning the last batch." I laughed and pulled the tray from the oven, bread edges blackened, smoke curling like incense. "Perfect," I said, setting it down. "Ash and clay. Ruth looked at me quizzically. It's what I'm made of, I explained softly. A little ruin, a little earth. But somehow I hold. She smiled, reaching for my hand. Then let the world see what you can build from it. And as the scent of burnt bread and sea air filled the room, I knew she was right. I was no longer a woman escaping. I was a woman becoming. He said I'd never make it a week without him. I smiled, the kind of smile that only hides a storm. The day I left, the roses in our marble garden wilted faster than I did. The sea outside my window murmurs like an old friend now. But it wasn't always like this. 2 years ago, I was a ghost behind golden curtains, a wife in name, an ornament in practice. My name is Elara, and once upon a time, I belonged to Victor Hale. He built empires from glass and steel, and I was his finest trophy, flawless, silent, and displayed under the right light. Every dinner was a ceremony of control. The wine poured just so, the silverware aligned to perfection, and silence resting between us like a well-trained dog. He liked to watch me eat. Not because he cared if I was hungry, but because he liked to measure how much I would allow myself to take. Moderation is elegance, he used to say. You've always been good at restraint, I would smile. I was always smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that keeps peace like a hostage. I lived in a mansion that smelled like polish and absence. It was filled with art I didn't choose, music I didn't play, and rooms I wasn't allowed to enter unless accompanied. My favorite room had no windows, only mirrors. I learned to disappear there, standing still until even my reflection looked tired of pretending. The clocks were the only ones that spoke. I began to understand time not in minutes, but in silences. The long kind, the kind that pressed against your ribs until breathing felt like rebellion. Victor's world revolved around power and precision. He loved the way people feared his presence, the pause before they spoke, the way their laughter dulled in his shadow. He told me once, "You're lucky, Elara. Most women would give anything to live your life. But luck is a fragile currency." He gave me everything money could buy. And in exchange, took everything that couldn't. My art, my voice, my small messy dreams. Before marriage, I used to paint, not for praise, but to make sense of things words could never carry. He called it a hobby for people without purpose. So I stopped. The brushes gathered dust in a drawer that even the maids forgot existed. There was one person who seemed to see me, Miriam, the housekeeper. An older woman with a softness that made the house feel briefly human. She had a way of leaving things where I would find them. A warm cup of tea on the windowsill, fresh flowers by my nightstand, once even my old brush, its handle repaired with gold wire. She never said much. But sometimes, silence can feel like the deepest act of kindness. "Thank you," I whispered once, after she had left a sprig of lavender on my pillow. Her voice floated back down the hall. "You deserve something that grows." That winter, the world outside our mansion was painted white, but inside, it was only glass and shadows. Victor had just come home from another business dinner, smelling of power, of victory, of something colder than the snow outside. We sat at the dining table, a feast between us that neither of us touched. The crystal glasses gleamed, empty. He poured wine, swirling it like it might reveal prophecy. "Elara," he said finally, not looking at me. "You've been distant." I wanted to laugh. Distant? How do you measure distance in a life where the walls themselves keep you apart? Instead, I said softly, "I've been thinking." He smirked. "Always dangerous." His reflection shimmered in the glass cabinet across from us, a ghost of the man I once mistook for safety. Then came the line that broke something sacred and silent inside me. "Without me, you'd have nothing," he said. "You couldn't even live a week on your own." The words hung between us, heavy and final. I didn't argue. I just looked at his reflection, how small it seemed against all that glass. That night, I walked the halls barefoot, the marble floor cold under my feet. The air smelled faintly of roses and loneliness. I found myself drawn to the attic, a place I hadn't been in years. The door creaked open, dust floating like tiny stars in the air. Among old trunks and forgotten chandeliers, I found a box. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, was my old sketchbook. My breath caught. The pages trembled in my hands. Faces I'd painted long ago stared back at me. Women looking out of windows, trees bending in storms, colors wild and imperfect. Every stroke carried a part of me that Victor had tried to erase. I sat there until dawn, fingers tracing lines made by a younger, braver version of myself. When morning light spilled through the cracks of the roof, I knew I didn't belong here. Not anymore. Miriam was in the kitchen when I came down. Her eyes found mine, and I think she already knew. "You're leaving," she said softly. I nodded. She didn't try to stop me. She just poured me tea, one last act of care. "Take your time, Miss Elara," she said. "The world's been waiting." I packed lightly, a few clothes, a ring my mother once wore, and the sketchbook. Everything else I left behind. When I stepped outside, the sky was the color of forgiveness. Mist curled along the driveway, wrapping the mansion in soft gray silence. For a moment, I looked back. The windows glowed faintly, 1,000 eyes that never saw me. I walked anyway. Each step was a small rebellion, each breath a declaration. By the time I reached the gate, the sun had begun to rise, pale and uncertain, like me. I didn't know where I was going. But for the first time in years, I didn't need to. Freedom doesn't roar. It whispers. It feels like air after drowning, like the first touch of rain after a long drought. As the mansion lights faded behind me, I pressed the sketchbook to my chest and whispered to the wind, "I'll find myself again." The road ahead disappeared into fog, soft and endless, and with quiet footsteps. I walked toward the unknown, into the wide waiting world. The sea outside my window glows gold now. Morning light moves across the waves like slow music, steady, unhurried, certain. It fills the walls of my home with a warmth I once thought belonged only to other people. It's been 10 years since I left the marble house. 10 years since I carried a single sketchbook into the mist and promised myself I would learn how to breathe again. I keep that promise still. The house I live in now sits on a cliff that watches over the sea. Its walls are sun-worn, soft with salt and laughter. Every window faces the horizon, because I decided I'd never look at a wall again when I could look at light. The rooms are alive, full of the scent of turpentine and fresh bread, of stories and paint, of small beginnings. I call it the quiet house, though the name doesn't quite fit anymore. It hums with life. Footsteps of students, clinking mugs, the rustle of canvases being stretched. They come from everywhere. Young painters, single mothers, retired sailors, people who were told once that they weren't enough. I teach them to see the world as it truly is, imperfect, fleeting, but radiant. I tell them, don't paint what you see. Paint what you feel when you see it. And they do. Each brush stroke feels like a small prayer, a reaching toward something pure. On quiet afternoons, I sit by the window with a pot of tea and my old sketchbook. Its pages are thick now, layered with years of living, rain stains, fingerprints, pieces of moments I never want to forget. Sometimes I trace the earliest pages, where the colors are faint and unsure, and I think of the woman who painted them. A woman who smiled through glass, who believed silence was safety. Today, I write a letter to her. The ink flows easily, like the tide. Dear Elara, you will be told that you are too small to matter, that your dreams are fragile things meant to be hidden, not lived. You will believe it for a while. You will sit in quiet rooms, surrounded by gold and nothingness, and wonder if you have disappeared. You will forget your own voice, but it will never forget you. And one day, when you think it's too late, you will find the courage to leave. You will build something vast, not from stone or gold, but from hands that hold and hearts that heal. You will meet kindness in a loaf of bread, friendship in a brushstroke, love in the act of creating something honest. You will learn that peace isn't loud, It's the soft sound of waves at dawn. It's the laughter of people who have found home in your presence. You will be told again that you can't live without him, but you will, and when you do, you will live more fully than he could ever imagine. So, breathe. Keep painting. The world is waiting. With love, Elara, I fold the letter carefully and tuck it into the back of the sketchbook. The linen wrapping around it feels smooth, familiar. For a moment, I rest my hand on it, not out of sorrow, but gratitude. This book carried me through every season of becoming. I place it gently in a wooden chest near the window. I imagine someday someone will find it, a young artist perhaps, or a girl who feels too small for the world. Maybe she'll open it, see the colors, read the letter, and believe again. The sun is rising higher when I hear a soft knock at the door. A girl stands there, no older than 15, shy eyes, paint on her fingers. She's new, one of Ruth's recommendations from the town. Ruth still visits often. Her hair is silver now, but her spirit hasn't dimmed. The girl clutches a small canvas to her chest. "I'm sorry I'm early," she says, voice barely above the gulls outside. I smile. Early is when the light is best. She looks around the studio, the open windows, the drying paintings, the shelves of clay cups and seashells. "I don't know where to start," she admits. I hand her a clean brush. The bristles catch the light. Start wherever the color feels right. She hesitates, then dips the brush into ochre and bends over the canvas. The first stroke is trembling, uncertain, but then the second comes easier. Watching her, I feel that same pulse I felt years ago in the attic. The thrill of beginning again. The studio fills with the sounds of creation, brushes scratching softly, the hush of the sea, the clink of cups on the table. Someone hums. Someone laughs. Ruth arrives later with warm bread wrapped in cloth. "You're still feeding half the town," she teases. "I'm only returning what you gave me," I reply. She glances at the room full of students and art and sunlight. "Looks like you've built yourself an empire." I smile, shaking my head. "Not an empire. A home. Evenings are my favorite. The light turns honey gold, and the whole sea seems to breathe in rhythm with us. Sometimes Jonas visits from his framing shop, still kind-eyed, still gentle. We drink coffee and talk about how art saves people in ways they never expect. Once, he told me, "You never painted revenge. You painted healing." He was right. The world has given back what I once thought I'd lost, not in grand gestures, but in quiet returns, a shared laugh, a full table, the feeling of being enough. Later that night, when the students have gone and the waves whisper below, I step outside. The sky is painted with stars. I walk down to the shore, barefoot, the sand cool under my feet. In my hand is a clay cup, Ruth's gift from years ago, the one inscribed with a single word. Enough. I fill it with seawater and hold it up to the dawn. The horizon blushes pink and gold. He said I couldn't live without him. I whisper to the wind. But I did, and I lived more fully than he could ever imagine. The tide moves forward, gentle and sure, touching my toes like an old friend. For the first time in my life, I don't feel the need to chase anything, not approval, not perfection, not even peace. It's already here, the gulls cry above. The scent of the sea drifts through my hair. Behind me, in the windows of the quiet house, warm light flickers like a living heartbeat. Somewhere inside, a student laughs, a sound that feels like tomorrow. I take one last breath, eyes closed, the cup resting against my heart. I have built my own light. And this life, this home, this endless horizon is enough. Outro narration, gentle. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.